she could put her camera on.
It
My
is on.
camera is on.
Okay, Amy's camera is on, and we are now recording, so now you may call it to order, Amy.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the regularly scheduled Windsor Southeast Supervisory Union School Board meeting. I am the chair, Amy McMullen. Our first order of business, are there any changes or additions to the agenda?
I don't have any.
I have none as well. Next, I will take a motion to approve the minutes from March 22nd.
So moved.
Second,
Is there a second?
second,
Okay, so that was Nancy and Rebecca.
No, I don't know who moved.
It was Elizabeth.
Oh, Elizabeth, okay. Yeah, there was an example of not knowing. And I recently took minutes for a meeting where everyone just kept talking and it was really impossible. So when anyone speaks, if you could just state your name before you speak so that the person taking our minutes can kind of keep track.
Yeah, and a matter of fact, I just realized that Wendy said, is Wendy here? She had a softball game and said she might be a little late. But you know what? We're recording, so I can send her she'll be here, but I'll send her the recording.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so it was moved and seconded to approve the minutes from March 22nd. Are there any changes, clarifications, corrections that you would like to see done?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes from March 22nd, please say aye.
aye,
Opposed? Abstentions? Wonderful, thank you. Next, we have our superintendent's report.
Right, and I'll try to be brief for a couple of reasons. One, many of you heard some of these items at your regular board meetings, so I won't repeat. And also, some of the things I would have reported on are on the agenda tonight, so we'll talk about them when we get to them on the agenda. I did want to just give a quick shout out to the three members of the board who are negotiating with the teachers, right? Bill and Scott and Jackie. I don't know if Jackie's here or not, but we are still in the process of negotiations. We have another session on Wednesday night. Our goal is to try to finish negotiations with teachers, certainly before the year ends. We'd rather not go into a year without a contract, as we had to do last year, mostly because of COVID and trying to get the group together. But this year, there should be no excuses. I know that Bill Yates has been working really hard on proposals and counter proposals that are really helping us. You know, we've very succinctly and practically we've stepped up the game a little bit, and I think a lot of that is due to Bill's organizational skills, his ability to work through spreadsheets, and to put some proposals on the table. So I really thank him for that. There are a couple of legal pieces, and Elizabeth, I see Elizabeth also represents us on the legislature, and I only have 4 that I'm going to speak about really quickly. And then Elizabeth, if you have anything else that you think we need to know about, then let me know. I did, by the way, Amy, just Daniel Wartz just put a note in the chat. Did we skip public participation? And I don't know, did you? I lost track because I was trying to get people signed in and signed on. Did we do public participation? I see people shaking their head no. So we might have inadvertently skipped over that. So maybe when I finish my report, we can go back to public participation if that's okay with everybody. Does that work for you, Amy?
I think she's frozen.
Amy might have frozen. Okay, she can sign off and sign back on. Everybody else is okay with that, though, at this point? Well, no, Amy's back.
Here I am.
Okay.
Yes, I apologize profusely for having skipped over that. So as soon as David finishes his report, we will have public participation.
Right.
And that will be for items not on the agenda.
So the piece of legislation I want to talk about, first of all, we had S100, the Universal Meals Bill. That was going to get, I think, put to more study, but we got good news, at least we think it's good news, that the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has approved universal meals for 1 more year. So that means that through federal support and state support, we will continue feeding all children breakfast and lunch through the entire 2021-22 school year. I think that'll give the state a little more time to work on that universal meals bill. I think certainly it's something that we would support, but it has to be affordable to local communities as we go forward. But we found that it's really helped this year with the universal meals because, number one, it does provide more food for kids who may need that, and also it has eliminated the stigma of having to, self-report that you are at an income level that requires free and reduced lunch. So just stay tuned. But next year, everybody does eat. This started as H81. It has passed now into law. The governor didn't sign it. This was the healthcare bill, the revisions to the healthcare bill. It mostly related to support staff, and the support staff, as I understand, now healthcare will be divvied out on a sliding scale. Elizabeth, did you want to talk more about that? It looked like you had a quizzical look on your face.
Sorry. I'm not sure what bill you mean, David.
It started. It was called it was the revision of the healthcare bill, right? That it was the one that removed the superintendent from that statewide negotiations.
Oh, from the negotiations. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this was related to healthcare negotiations. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Right. And that's fine. And so what healthcare is now negotiated at the state level. And so there was some concern that some of our support staff, who are the least paid in school districts throughout the state, were having to pay a greater percentage of their salary because they had to live with that negotiated deal. So now there's a way to prorate the benefits, and the state will take care of all of that and will tell us how we're going to do it. And we don't have to necessarily worry about it. S114, that's the literacy bill. My understanding, Elizabeth, unless you want to correct me, my understanding is that that's going to pass in a rather scaled down form. I think there's going to be some money available for pilot literacy programs, but I think there's also going to be some more study at the Agency of Education this summer on that. Did you have anything else to say about that bill, Elizabeth?
Hold on, let me put my pen on.
There you go. Jane Pats.
Here. Okay. The House Committee on Education is actually discussing that bill this week. And there's also a very miscellaneous, very wide miscellaneous bill that's supposed to go up this week. But the thing that, it has all kinds of different fixes, but one of them is that it should fund Act 1, which is the ethnic studies bill, and they've been waiting to get funding for that, so they can sort of move that process along at the state level, and that should finally provide that. So,
Right. And while you have your pin on, Elizabeth, the last one that I had was the weighting study, and my understanding was, and this is around how we weight students for the per pupil block grant, sometimes called the equalized pupil formula. And there was some recommended changes to the way we were going to figure out those weights. And my understanding is that is probably just going to go to a study committee this summer. Is that your understanding? They're not going to tackle that this year?
it's not a study committee; it's an implementation committee.
Okay.
So it's not going to just vanish. It's actually trying to figure out how to, and the bill has an amendment which was, I believe, passed, though I need to check that after we move from this. I'll check to make sure that that's absolutely true. But the bill had an amendment that asked that that the weighting truly be towards most needy, prioritized by neediness and not just by town size.
Okay.
And so I believe that amendment passed. It was, anyway, it's supposed to be, I think it starts, the debate on that starts tomorrow. For anyone who's interested, you can watch online if you feel like devoting your day to that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and that could have a pretty big impact on some of our districts. That's why we want to pay attention to it. And my understanding, I talked a little bit to John Arison, who's on the Education Committee, and he said that one of the things they're suggesting is that it get rolled out carefully and slowly, and that they maybe they look at the poverty weight first and see how that impacts, and then go to some of those other weights around rurality and some of the other pieces. But again, so much of how we figure our tax rate is based on how we calculate that equalized pupil. So we'll pay attention.
Yeah, it'll be changing, and I believe that all of our districts will benefit from this change.
That's the way it looked in the initial draft of the legislation.
And again, I don't know, task force or whatever it is an implementation task force. It's not going to change anything about the law. Oh,
that's good. So it is going to be implemented. That's good to know. Yeah, because it does benefit us. The last thing I just want to talk about tonight is, and because we've been working hard on this, Christine's going to help me, because I think Christine's going to share her screen. The administrative team and a group of teachers and support staff, we've been meeting on a regular basis to look at, we call ourselves the scheduling / restructuring task force, and we've been working on what next year's schedule could look like. And the reason why we've taken so much time is we set the general parameters, which I'm going to share with you tonight, but then we had to make sure, here comes Mark Youngling, then we had to make sure that each school could live within those parameters and could actually schedule the academic time that's recommended in the outline. So Christine, do you want to share your screen, or are you having trouble sharing your screen? Are you good? I'm just going to do this pretty quickly.
Yep, I'll share
and
it
then
right.
If people have questions, they certainly can ask questions. We also looked at the educator quality standards so that we could make sure that we had enough instructional minutes in the day. We also are assuming that there will be some basic restrictions that we'll be dealing with next year. We're hoping with vaccinations on schedule that there'll be less restrictions, but the general consensus from the Agency of Education and the Vermont Department of Health is that there will be some level of masking, there'll be some level of distancing. So again, we just want to make sure that whatever we plan it carefully, much like we tried to do this year, and that we have kids in school as much as they possibly can be, and at the same time keep them safe and keep teachers safe, and paying attention to, which we'll talk about later, to some of the recovery efforts that need to go on. So do you want to go to that first slide, Christine? So the first thing the committee looked at, there's only 2 slides here, so this is not going to take a long time. One of the things we wanted to look at as we went about this as a committee is we wanted to look at those things this year that we felt really worked. And because we entered into this quickly, we carefully, but quickly. And what we found was some of the things that we did for COVID restriction actually worked well for kids. And we saw the climate and culture in the buildings was quite positive. We saw a tremendous reduction in office referrals and discipline referrals. We had a very limited number of hazing, harassment, and bullying complaints this year. And just in general, and I've been in all of the buildings as carefully as I can be in those buildings, there was just a general peaceful atmosphere that really worked for us. And kids seemed attentive and engaged. And also some of that was due to the class sizes because we had some kids that were out in the remote environment, but that helped really well. So the assumptions we made going into the scheduling is that the things that we wanted to hold on to, you can look at them right there. Fewer transitions, having more of family style lunches in the classrooms. We think next year we'll want kids to experience the food line and be able to do a little bit more selection, especially as they get older. But we think they can still bring those lunches back to the rooms. They found that it really built community. It really helped them to also make that part of the instructional day in terms of how people, how they hold themselves during a meal time and how they treat each other and just some general manners. The other thing that really worked is keeping kids in partner teams and pods over time. So we wanted to hold on to some of that teaming work that went on this year. We did really seem to experience some great success with integration of the related arts embedded into classroom activities. As a matter of fact, the unified arts teachers, the art teacher, the music teacher, they reported to us that they really liked getting to know the kids in not just by coming to their classroom once a week, but actually being involved in some of those projects in the actual classroom. A little bit more flexibility of how core time is used, trying to maintain smaller class sizes in those pods. Again, the staffing with partner teams, allowing for additional collaborative practices and time throughout the day. This was a big one. That next to the last one there, the fact that if in fact we're going to implement our strategic plan and we're going to call for more collaborative-based work and integrated work, place-based work, project-based work, that needs team planning. It needs teachers need to have time every day together so that they can do some of that planning within those pods. We did have that this year to a limited degree. We want to do it on a greater scale next year. And then in order to do that last bullet means you have to have some common prep time during the school day to make in order to make that happen. So now if we go on to the next slide, Christine. So this is what we're not done with 9 through 12 yet, but 9 through 12 will look, I think, somewhat similar to this schedule. But this is for our K through 8 students. Essentially, arrival will be between 7:50 and 8 o'clock. We're going to try to have a little bit of a structured arrival just because it seemed to keep kids more calm, a little bit safer. Again, we think we're going to be dealing with some of the COVID restrictions next year, but students will arrive, and then from 7:50 to 8 o'clock, and actually probably right into that advisory and morning meeting, we'll have the students settling in. We'll have the school, we'll have the universal breakfast program that worked really well. And again, being able to integrate the advisory activities with the meal, with the breakfast meal, really seems to work. Then what we did is we had basically throughout the day 3 core blocks. But the way we want to do those core blocks is we want to team a math and a science teacher together, and we want a team or somebody who has a math and science sort of background, and we want to team somebody that's got more of a social studies and ELA background. And during those cores, one at 8:30 to 10, one from 10 to 11:30, and then the one right after the lunch recess would be from 12:30 to 2. that during those cores, that's where the integrated work would happen. That's where the project-based work would happen. Lunch and recess also would be part of those. Again, kids would be part of those advisories and pods for that piece. We also found that we were able to, in the good weather, combine lunch and recess outside rather than inside, and that really worked well, especially in the early fall. It got a little trickier as winter crept up. And then from 2 to 2:15 would be our standard delivery, and that still leaves time in the teacher day for all of the collaborative work that needs to go on in the afternoon from 2:15 to 3:15. Our teacher day basically goes from 7:45 to 7:30 actually.
No,
Well,
7:45.
it goes, let's put it this way. It goes 7.5 hours by contract is the teacher workday. So in order for teachers to be able to have time to do that shared planning, to be working on all the initiatives that we've got going there, we want to every single day carve out that that hour block for those collaborative practices. If we go to the next slide, and then I'll take questions at the end. If we go to the next slide, this might give you an idea, and I don't know, is Angie on? No, Angie, if you want to work folks through a little bit of what that 2:15 to 3:15 staff time might look like on this slide. Do you want to talk?
Sure, I'm right here.
Okay.
Sure. So because recovery planning as well as implementing our strategic plan requires us to have access to our staff where they can be available to have these important conversations, to look at data, to learn the skills to use data to improve student outcomes. We are looking at a weekly to a monthly meeting schedule. We have our strategic plan and our recovery plan. Ouch, sorry. My cat is attacking me.
There you go.
As I take her out of my neck. Sorry about that, people. So some meetings will only have to happen once a month, but some meetings will happen weekly or bi-weekly. Some of the meetings will be building-based for sure, and probably that would be a bulk of the week will be building-based, but we do need to have opportunities for staff to meet across the supervisory union in grade-alike teams, as well as in vertical teams to look at language arts, literacy, math, science, social studies, instructional practices, and so on. So this is just our initial outline of how that time could be spent. We want to be able to show the staff how we're going to get the work done, and this is really key for us to be able to map that out for them.
Yeah, and I think that collaborative work is what schools oftentimes are missing, right? That time where teachers can get together and actually do the work that we've outlined for them. And I think that this, this should work. The other piece you should be aware of is that there will be during that last hour of the day, there will be, and we just started talking about this within the last week, there will be some intervention work. There may be some tutoring work that has to go on. We are working with all the partners we had pre-COVID for after-school type programming, the rec centers, bringing back Bridging the Gap, BTG. I've been meeting with Mackenzie, who's coordinating that program now, and they've made a commitment to start back up in the fall. Again, a lot of this depends on the restrictions and it depends on the COVID environment, but we're trying to be optimistic and thinking that we will be able to use additional resources to make this work. So essentially, from an instructional standpoint, it adds about an hour to our existing day. We get out now around 1:15. This will get us out somewhere around 2:15. But it also does build into the contracted day with teachers the time necessary, the creative time necessary to do the work. So that's it, and I'll certainly answer any questions anybody has. But I know we really wanted to certainly run it by the Supervisory Union Board tonight. But then also, I know the community really, they have to do their planning too. They need to know how it works. We also expect that more kids will travel by bus next year than drop off, but there'll still be a fair amount of dropping off we think, both in the morning and the afternoon, less than we have today. But I think that's okay. So I don't know if you can see all the hands, Angie, and you might be able to stop sharing now, Christine, I think, because I think we can, unless we need to go back, we'll go back if we have to. But I see Colleen's hand and I see Anne Marie's hand.
Hi. I had a couple of questions. Is the schedule, this is a schedule change from this year, of course, but it's also a schedule change from the schedule we had before this pandemic kind of turned us on our heads. Are we contemplating a new schedule that will keep going forward, or is this in our recovery year schedule?
Yeah,
Or do you know yet?
No, that's a great question, Colleen. And the truth is, we don't know definitely yet. I mean, I think we're going to just see how this works in that recovery year and see how it works for, for students and for staff and for, the community. But we think it'll be a good transition. I mean, some school, until we got the unified school day, which quite frankly, we didn't have a unified school day across all 4 buildings until the last contract was adopted, and both the union and the school boards worked hard to get that unified day. So we had some buildings that would start a little later than you could see proposed there, and they'd get out a little bit later. We had some that started a little earlier and got out. Now the idea is that we have a unified school day, so things were going to have to change anyway a little bit post-COVID, and even if we hadn't ever had COVID, we were going to have to work on this anyway. But I think what we did is we took the lessons from COVID and then took that unified school day and worked with the union and worked with the teachers and said, will this work? So we can guarantee that it would be for the full year next year, and then I think we'd assess it at the end. We'd be gathering data around student performance and teacher performance, community feedback. Some of the continuation of this, I think, will depend on community programs and after school programs that, because, some parents still, even when we went till 2:30 or 2:45, we had after school programs where kids would stay till 5. Sure. because parents use school sometimes also as a bit of a childcare situation. So I'm more interested in getting back to that and building up, I forget, Anne Marie, help me out, at Wethersfield, I think it wasn't called Bridging the Gap, but what was the after school program called at Wethersfield?
You put me on the spot. I forget now too. It's been a long time. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it either.
Okay, but maybe we have a Wethersfield person that'll remember that. But I know we pause.
Is it pause?
Oh, yeah, pause. Yeah.
Thank you, Laura, and I'm sure that's an acronym for something, or maybe it's not. But we understand that one of our goals will be, as the year progresses, to just keep building those after school programs, because I know those are important for folks. Some people have good childcare and they can work it out and they don't have the problem, but we'll keep a close eye on that. And actually, when I said Colleen the first time, I meant Colleen Deschamps, but I'm glad you spoke up, Colleen. But I had Colleen Deschamps' hand I saw, and Amy, I don't know, can you see everybody?
I can see hands when they're raised, and Colleen Spence, followed by Anne Marie. I have not seen Colleen Deschamps' hand raised.
I didn't raise it.
Okay, you did not, Colleen? Okay, she did not. All right, that must have been Colleen Spence then. All right. So Anne Marie, I do see your hand though.
Yeah, I just was wondering, how do the middle school students fit into this? Because you have 3 classes here, and middle school has the 4 classes that they go around to, and that's just part 1. I have some more.
No, that's a good question, and we're going to try to do the same thing with the middle school, and the middle school teachers in all the buildings, including at Wethersfield, said that they can put teachers back to back math, science, and social studies English. So there'll be those cores throughout the day at the middle level that for example, you could break a core into two 40-minute periods if you wanted to, or math science could do a combined project or unit that would work during that during that core block. So the schedule you saw tonight also works for the middle school.
Okay, and like what about like band practice and stuff like that? Would that have to come out of the core time as well?
No, we're hoping not. I mean, a matter of fact, and I don't know if Zach Shambo is on or not, but he was one of the ones that took a lead on this. And I don't know, Christine, if you want to help me, but the idea is that there may be some instrumental lessons, as always, that come out of, but we're going to try to find those periods of time when we can do the ensemble work without having to interfere with the academic portion of the day. If anybody wants to add to that, feel free, because I know we talked a lot about that.
I can add what some of the thinking was, which is what we call win time, what I need time, would be an ideal time for kids to be pulled out, as opposed to having to choose between something like ensemble and recess, or ensemble and lunch, which is often what happens in schools where the music programs tend to crash and burn. So as Zach was thinking about in Weathersfield, they would do it opposite win time.
Yeah.
I don't see that on the list here though of times.
It's not on that general schedule, Anne Marie. I'm sorry, this is Christine. It's embedded in the local schedules, which all look just a little bit different.
Yeah.
And we did talk about, I don't know if you noticed on the collaborative practices schedule, that was the last slide. I mean, we haven't flushed it out, but we did have a creative time on Friday afternoons, and we have discussed maybe across the SU, there's a time where kids can get together to play, which is pretty exciting, I think. So definitely work in progress in that area.
Yeah, but the idea, other than, again, with instrumental lessons, it's hard to completely avoid academic times, but we're thinking the ensemble work we can, and I wish Zach were on tonight, but I didn't ask him to be here, but he had an idea in Weathersfield where he could avoid academic time to make it work. And also along the lines of what Christine just said, Anne Marie, each of the buildings spent a fair amount of time getting a detailed schedule for the local building. And we thought about showing those tonight, but it just didn't seem right. I think what we'll do next month is we'll show those local schedules that have more of the things like Christine just talked about, the win time, the actual core time spelled out in a little bit more detail, because each building went back and did that.
Okay. And what are other districts doing? Like, I mean, it seems like since we're shortening our day, I just don't know if, parents are going to feel like they're really getting their taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, no,
better than everybody else's.
Yeah, no, I think it's a legitimate question. I'm not sure what other districts are doing or how ahead of the game they really are at this point. But I think that we are just going to have to be sensitive to what's going to work for us and what's going to work for our kids and our staff and our communities. I have not heard of any major models yet. I know that for us, one of the things and why it didn't have to change dramatically is because we already, other than the kids who are remote, we already had kids in 5 days a week, right? You've still got some districts where, right, we've talked about this before, where you've got, some kids in on Monday and Tuesday, then nobody's in on Wednesday, then a different group's in on Thursday and Friday. I think they're going to be struggling to get back to 5 days. Whether they go with a little bit more of a shortened day or not, I don't know. By adding that 15 minutes on at the beginning and going all the way to dismissal, by the time they dismiss, it's 2:15. For the teachers, it's not going to shorten it at all because the work is still there to do. But for the kids, I mean, most of our schools, even under the old system, dismissed somewhere between 2:30 and 2:45. It varied, like I said, because we didn't have the unified day.
Yeah, I think to me, I guess the difference would be, I think the kids usually at Weathersfield were at school by like 7:30 before. And then they were out, like you said, around 2:45, I think. So
Yeah.
it's not that much shorter, but it's a little bit shorter on both ends, I think.
Well, here's what used to happen, right? And I can take Weathersfield as an example, but in all of our buildings, the day would quote unquote start at 7:30, and then we had to be careful around once COVID hit around that. But a lot of times kids would not go right to their classrooms at 7:30.
Yeah.
That what would happen is they'd be in this multi-purpose room, driving themselves crazy and driving the staff crazy. I mean, the difference here is that when the students arrive, they go right to the classrooms, and whether it's advisory instruction or because by the way, advisory is not like just let's hang out and let's play games. Advisory is a specific, it's directed, and those teachers have a curriculum, an advisory curriculum, and that works itself out over the course of the time. So I think if you looked at our schedules in the past and you factored in things like that, the transition times going between periods, I know in some schools it was upwards to 3 or 4 minutes changing classes and getting a kid from point A to point B. We're really going to reduce that next year. And I think that if you added up the time in schools that kids were actually in front of a teacher for instruction, I think next year you'd see more than what we had even pre-COVID because of all of those transitions. That's just my personal opinion. I don't know if any of the principals want to speak to that, but that we talked a lot about that.
Did you have more, Anne Marie?
No, I think that's all for now. Yeah.
Okay. So Scott, and then Rebecca, and then Jamie.
Thank you, Amy. Can you hear me okay if I just speak like this?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, thank you. So I want to go back to the beginning of David's presentation and quickly point out something that kind of makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And that is in regards to the universal meals, this is David repeated an assertion that I've heard in the statewide media several times, and that is from both the principal and the superintendent's association, the concern that universal meals is great, but we have to be careful of our budgets. And that is, it's a kind of a seesaw assertion that you add universal meals on one side and the budget goes up on the other side. But of course that is bunk because it fails to understand and speak to all of Vermonters that students are Vermonters, parents of students are Vermonters, caregivers are Vermonters. And so we're all in this together. And that assertion from these two statewide professional groups of school administrators is a real problem, I think. And it's really kicking ourselves in the foot. And it's the moving the financing of food programs from children coming to school with money from parents or from their allowance, and moving that to a community-wide contribution builds the kind of sustainability into food systems that is exactly what we need and what other school districts need to be able to make quality food systems go year after year. The equipment we need, the employees that we need, the quality food that we need. You can't base that on the ups and downs of and the fashion that blows through this society that makes people choose food programs or not, and whether they're going to be in the system this week or not and send their money to school or not. It's not sustainable. And so school directors find themselves in moments like this all the time where they feel like, where they're faced with a donation, you might say. And should we take that donation, or should we build a sustainable program? Well, obviously cash from home is not a donation, but but I'm all for the sustainable financing of food programs. So I don't like it when, I don't mean to point at you so much, David. I know you're reporting from the Superintendent's Association, but that's just, I gotta stand up in defense of the parents and caregivers and students in our system that, they're all Vermonters, and we're taxpayers too. And I don't have kids in school now, but those parents they're sending cash to school and paying their property tax into the statewide education fund. So we just need to continue to make this fair and spread the costs across the whole state. And I think it frankly is just so political. It just plays to the aging demographic of Vermont to talk over and over and over again about, the concern of the school for the school budget.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, thank you.
No, Scott, and I think to just make a comment based on your comment, I think that's what the legislators grappled with this year when they looked at that universal bill, and that is what is the most fair and equitable way to do it. I mean, I think what we saw this year was if you get the reimbursement rate right, because remember, we're operating under the summer reimbursement rate, which is higher than what happens during the school year. If you get that reimbursement rate right and you serve lunch to enough kids from a universal perspective, then you may not have to subsidize the lunch program anymore. I mean, there were times when Heartland or Windsor, had to kick in $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 to subsidize the lunch program anyway. This year, the way it's operating now, at least the early financials are showing that we may not have to subsidize at all, and that's because more kids are eating, the quality of food is getting better, and I think we've got the reimbursement rates right. So I agree, Scott. I think if we can work this out, now we've got one more year, no pressure on Elizabeth, but for the legislature to figure this out and see if there's a way to do this and spread that burden across, all the taxpayers in the state of Vermont.
I think they passed a bill about it from the Senate to the House. I was just looking to see whether, I think they're taking it up I know the House Education Committee is looking at that bill right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can't remember whether they're taking testimony on it this week, but Scott, I would urge you to consider testifying on that, because that's a very powerful argument. Seriously.
Agreed. Who was next? Was Rebecca next?
Rebecca is next.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Rebecca.
David, can you just clarify for the public that when you say buildings, you're not talking about only Windsor schools, that this board really encompasses several communities. Some people may not realize that here in town.
Yeah, good clarification. Yeah, tonight we're at the Supervisory Union Board meeting. For those of you who may not have known exactly what meeting you stumbled into tonight, and the Supervisory Union Board, represents all three districts: Weathersfield School District, Heartland School District, and the Mount Ascutney School District. And what we're finding, which is why this meeting is becoming more and more important, and attendance is really good. I think we've got just about every board member here tonight and a lot of community members on, because what the state has done slowly over the last couple of years, they've moved a lot of programs and practices and initiatives to the supervisory union level. So everything from, universal lunch to transportation to special education to curriculum and instruction, it's all part of what we all have to do together. And so we are representing all three districts tonight. Good point, Rebecca. Jamie?
I know you briefly touched on the after-school programs, and I can't speak to any of the other schools because I'm not completely familiar with theirs, but for Weathersfield, we have pause, and that was pretty much staffed with staff. So has that been taken into consideration now that you have dismissal and then you have an hour that staff is going to be preoccupied?
Yeah, that's part of that, Jamie, that's a great question. That's part of what we're working on right now is what part of the staff, if we were to reinvent that program, what could that look like? Because not all staff members, because remember also we have support staff members too, who can be involved in those after school programs. It doesn't just have to be instructional teachers and licensed teachers. So it's really just kind of looking over the whole of the staff and seeing what could be there and how often they would need to be there. So that's a work in progress, to be honest with you, Jamie, and we don't have it, completely locked down. And it might be something that kind of evolves over time as we open up next year, because again, part of it, like Anne Marie said, is going to be looking at the general state restrictions, looking at, what other programs can do, whether or not we can have volunteers in the building or not. That was one of the things that really slowed us down, because some of the folks, like the Four Winds program and stuff, that was all volunteer driven. But stay tuned, because the point I wanted to make tonight is we understand that a lot of our communities, and Weathersfield's not the only one, depend on some form of after school care. And it's my understanding that some of the ESSER monies are going to be able to be devoted to after school programming, and whether or not it has to be the exact same staff in the future or not, I think we can work on that. But it's a good point.
Thank you.
Rebecca, did you have your hand raised again? Okay. I think in the looking at time and where we are in the agenda, I think we need to be moving on, unless David, you had more in your report.
No, and I just want to thank that team that worked on that, because I'll tell you, it was hours and hours of work. Scheduling's not easy in a normal year, but it was really helpful, and especially shout out to Angie and Christine Bourne, who really helped with this a lot as we moved forward. No, that's it for me. And remember, we're going to go back, right, Amy, to public participation?
Yep. So thank you, David. We will now go back to public participation, and this is primarily for items not related to the agenda. If people can raise their hand, and I will call on you. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our items for discussion. And the first is the Anti-Racism Task Force.
Right. And the Anti-Racism Task Force, and I'll take this because Nikki Buck and I talked a little bit earlier today. She dealt with the external beginnings of this task force, because part of what the task force was supposed to do early on was to get a draft anti-racism policy that we're going to deal with under Section D tonight. So we won't necessarily talk about that with respect to until we get to that section. But there is, once we got done with that external work and the board work, we then had a group of probably, I think there's probably 30 people, quite frankly, who expressed interest early in the year. Then COVID hit. As a matter of fact, even last spring, had said that they would like to be a part of, once a policy is written, figuring out ways that we could implement that policy, in a very organized and structured way, certainly in a careful way, because when you talk about these subjects, there's a lot of different opinions and a lot of thoughts out there. So that task force really didn't meet much all year because we were doing the policy work, and we checked in with them a couple of times throughout the year, but I will tell you that they were eager to start the work, and they did start the work on Friday night. We had a meeting from 4:30 to 6:30. I will tell you, it was almost perfect attendance. I think at one point we had upwards to 30 people at that meeting. We had an outside facilitator working with us, because again, this is very delicate work. It's very fragile work, because you don't want to offend anybody. You want to make sure that everybody is understanding the common language and the purpose and what we're trying to accomplish. So the board authorized the expenditure out of our professional development monies of up to $10,000 to find a consultant. And we did find a consultant, Dr. Melissa Crum, who works for the Mosaic Educator Network. She was our facilitator on Friday, and I don't know if anybody who was at that meeting want to make comments, but I thought she did a great job, because what she did with all of us is she really slowed us down. She really wanted us to take a breath and to really decide what all of us, remember, these are people that are passionate about the ones who originally are, or who are now on this task force. They're passionate about equity, and they're passionate about making sure that everybody, feels safe within an organization. And what she said is, when you start using words like racism and racist, you have to be really careful. And she's an African-American woman, and she really pulled us back and had us go back to, definitions and purposes. And again, it was the initial meeting, but I thought she did an excellent job of facilitating. We did some small group work and some breakout work throughout the course of the meeting. It was only 2 hours, because it was a Friday from 4:30 to 6:30. But I thought it was interesting that even on a Friday night, you had that many staff members and that many community members willing to come together and talk about how we are ultimately going to roll this out to the entire community, because that's going to be the role of this internal task force, is figuring that piece out. So they're off and running. I thought I thought it was a good meeting. If anybody else wanted to make a comment about what happened Friday night, feel free. But I think it certainly, I think Melissa is the right one to guide at least this stage of the work right now, and then we can get on to the next phase. Did anybody else have a comment?
I thought she did a great job. I really liked her work. This is Colleen Spence. And maybe we'll talk about it a little more at the policy part. She's challenging us on some of the words that we have in our policy. So I wonder if we're going to go back and, make any significant changes to our policy document as a part of our workshop, as a part of the workshop work.
No,
And that's not a question as much as I'm wondering, kind of.
I think it's a good point. I would not be surprised if that doesn't happen.
Camp?
I also appreciated the way she challenged us, looked at our policy, and redirected the questions to us in small groups to discuss. And what she really made clear to me was that we are representing everyone in our community when we use this language. So she's making sure we're very clear that everyone is included. And what does the word inclusive mean? So I thought it was a great start.
Rebecca, did you have your hand raised?
Sorry about that. I was fooling around with the hand gesture. I thought Dr. Crum did a very good job of helping us understand the language in our policy. It's not language that we are used to. We're not having these conversations. They are, a lot of the language is new to many of us. And I thought she did a good job of asking us to examine these words and understand exactly what they mean. She gave a great analogy by speaking to an athlete, or once someone begins to do physical activity and they're not used to it, and at the beginning it hurts because they're just not used to it. And I think that she left us also with the reminder that these words need to be put into action, that they need to be role modeled, and that we need to live them. So it looks like the beginning of a journey. And so I thought I was also impressed with where she took us Friday evening.
Colleen Deschamps, did you want to speak again?
I think she put her hand.
Okay.
I see Elizabeth.
Yeah, I see Elizabeth, but I'm going to jump in just really quick because I have and then it's you, Elizabeth. What I really appreciated, and I'm still thinking about, was when we were talking about the difference between a safe space and a brave space. And when we were talking about to just get very clear in our minds what we think the difference between tolerance and inclusion, and what it is that we want our community to stand for, that it was just such a powerful conversation with everyone. And the small groups, there was just some amazing conversation. So go, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just going to say that just to add to all of that, that she really seemed to help us create common definitions and common ground. Like I hear the phrase safe space thrown around a lot without an agreement on what it really means. And so we sort of talked through that, which I think was also really helpful.
Yeah, she also gave us a fair amount of homework, which we're going to be working on over the next couple of weeks. We meet again in May. But to Colleen Spence's point, and I think we can discuss this when we get to the policy, because Colleen, I had that same thought. The way she's trying to help us unpack that policy, again, we want to go slowly. We want to be careful with it. I don't know what the implications of her work with us have on the actual words we're using in that policy, whether we want to slow that down a little bit, tonight, and we can talk about that later. But I had the exact same thought, Colleen, as she unpacked that policy a little more clearly. And I think it's always interesting, her perspective as an African-American, and also, trying to, just be careful that while we're trying to acknowledge that level of brave and safe spaces for all, that we aren't also, she said this a couple of times, alienating another group that doesn't come to the table with, with the same perspective or the same set of values. So again, I don't know what that means for the policy development, but I know it was a great eye opener for me on Friday night.
Okay, thank you. I think that is, since we're going to be moving very quickly into the policies, we have financials with Ed. I think I saw Ed's name somewhere here, that you are in our meeting.
Ed is here, and last night he sent out the financials. Ed's going to share his screen and kind of just go over this with us. Ed, are you on mute? Or can you? We can't hear you.
So last night I sent out I think it was 3 or 4 pages long summary of the financials for the end of the third quarter, which was March 31st. what I have up right now is the first page, which is a summary of all the different funds. The different funds. So just to be clear, when I'm talking about this all encompasses the general fund. And in the general fund, when you're talking in terms of assessments, what powers the general fund is the central office and special ed. And those are the two assessments that are dedicated to that. As you can see from this, the central office is right about at break even, and special education is running about $386,000 into the red. And then over here is another fund, and that's the early childhood fund. And the early childhood fund is running about $39,000 in the red. The early childhood program is running in the red primarily because we budgeted for, we're getting more preschool kids taking advantage of the tuition that the state has mandated we spend on early childhood kids. So we budgeted, I believe we budgeted about $330,000, and we're running about $43,000 over right now. Now those we've noticed, or I've noticed as we've gone through the year, they tend to go up and down. So that number includes what we expect to spend over the next 3 months. And what these programs do is they bill monthly, and we've had a lot of kids coming and going. So that could go down as the year progresses, because some of it is encumbrance or what we anticipate spending in the next 3 months. Special education is down significantly. I mean, is running a significant deficit. Again, we've got 3 months left. I'm going to the summary. A couple of things I want to point out is I'm being pretty conservative here. And by that, I mean, these are the two main reimbursements that we get from the state for special education. The special ed reimbursement intensive is every dollar that we spend, every eligible dollar that we spend in special education, we get a 56.5 cents reimbursement. So for every dollar, we get 56.5 cents. Roughly, it runs between, well, there's decimal points, but that's about what we get. And then this extra right here is the money that we get for students that run at an expense of over $60,000. For every dollar spent over $60,000, we get a dollar for dollar reimbursement. So as you can see, where I'm showing that we're going to be spending, we're going to be getting $523,000 less than what we had budgeted. I think what we're seeing, if you look down here, is you're starting to see some of what's happening here is that the service plan was written by Karen and is being implemented by Kate, and there's two distinct philosophies from what I can see, and this is just my take on this. So Karen's philosophy was more of we will tuition out students. We will use out-of-district placements as a significant part of the budget. That's why you're seeing up here, in her budget, she budgeted enough that when the state came back with their estimate based on her service plan, they said that based on this service plan, you're going to get $747,000. Well, you can see right now we got 169, and that reflects Katie's emphasis on building internal structure so that we don't have to ship kids out. In addition to that, we've had some kids that didn't need to be that moved on or were no longer students in our district. So if you look into here, you're seeing a bunch of changes to when I highlight this row, these are the positives. That means we're in the black for $804,000, and we're in the red for some of the other stuff. I don't know whether I can explain this as well as Katie, so I'm going to turn it over to her at this point if she's on, because I think that this is a little bit more nuanced than I'm sure clearly showing you a financial comparison. What this is telling me is that there's more to it than what I can tell you. So is Katie on?
Yes, she is.
I'm here, Ed.
Okay.
Okay, so just to go back to what Ed was talking about out-of-district students, we've been hit, it's like the triple whammy this year. As Ed mentioned, we have fewer students who are outplaced. We had several students who were at high cost placements who, because of COVID, decided to graduate early instead of staying up to their 22nd birthday, for example. We had a couple of those situations. We also have had a lot of students who are functioning remotely. So we're not hitting the 60K mark because between their tuition and the non-existent transportation, they're not getting there. So that combined with, we really haven't outplaced anybody this year. It's been very, very low as compared to other years. And of course, Karen wouldn't have known any of that when she wrote her service plan in October of 2019. Because I guess that's just so to be clear, those service plans are written almost, in October of the previous year. So as far as what we're doing in the spreadsheet that Ed showed, how special education is looking right now, what's in the red versus what's in the black. At the very beginning of the year, you may remember that I talked about how HCRSBIs, which used to be in a line under special education, were now going to be in-house. So that would be taken out of a different line. But when all of those positions were encumbered to our budget, they were actually encumbered to the psychological services line. So that's why that line looks way overspent, when what we need to be able to do is move there's a line under special education, which is almost dollar for dollar. It's 461,000, 461,000 instead of that overage. So there's not that line, sorry. What I have to do on my orange sheets in my hands, that line actually has in the black $483,000. So we have so that big giant number is attributed elsewhere. So and the other aspects, speech therapy is a little bit over and other things are a lot under. So we've been trying to keep to the budget, but as we didn't anticipate, especially the reimbursements being so low right now, I anticipate that's going to go up. The other thing that both Betsy and I have noticed is Betsy and I are the first line of getting our bills that we then send over, is some things are trickling in later than normal. Tuition bills as well as transportation. So I anticipate that, we'll probably be pretty close to the end of the year before we have a full number of what students will go over that 60. But that's in a nutshell, learning from this year, making sure that we have things, staffing in the right lines. It articulated pretty well. Our service plan went up last year from this year about 2%. And the state will allocate based on that with our lower numbers. So they'll give us a better idea, I hope a better guesstimate, because I do think some of it is a guesstimate of what our reimbursement will be heading into next year. But we're not the only ones. I think that it's been a guessing game, and how this is how COVID hit special ed, particularly in that area.
Yeah.
So with everything else, we've tried really hard to stay within our budget.
Yeah, and I'd like to pick up on what you just said, Katie, because I think obviously you don't have to look at this for long to see that this is not it's not an expenditure problem if you move a few of those lines around. It's really a revenue problem, right? And to Ed's credit, because we ask Ed to do this, be conservative on those revenues. My point, Katie, is I wonder if at some point, it may not happen, but do you think because of COVID and the fact that, we've got kids that were in placements that are now home and we're not using transportation for a lot of these kids? I mean, do you think there's a chance that, that those revenue receivables will come in a little higher, or maybe not? I mean, I know that's a guess, so maybe it's not even worth guessing, but obviously we've got a shortage on revenue of, over $1 million.
Right. I think we are now seeing almost all of our placements are in person and more students have gone back. So transportation will increase. But we do still have students who are taking all of their coursework remotely. And so I don't know. I think that's it's definitely an unknown variable. I'm not comfortable making too much of a guess. And I think Ed's right. Being conservative and being happily surprised at the end would be really nice. But we've seen more cost in transportation go up. That's for certain. But we're not seeing an increase in students outplaced. In fact, we're seeing a little bit of a decrease in that.
Okay, no, that's helpful. We still have, like you said, we've got 3 months to go.
So having said all of that and having discussed the various areas, are there any specific questions that people have about the financials at this point?
I think we're good, Ed.
Yeah, I'm not seeing
Okay.
any hands raised.
Thanks,
Okay,
Ed.
thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Stay tuned.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
Next
Summer
up,
program. You have summer programming, right?
yes, we do.
Yeah, summer programming. And we're going to put, I think we'll put Katie back on the spot again. Katie's been working really hard with a couple of summer programming coordinators on trying to put our recovery program together for the summer. I mean, first of all, our data, and Katie can speak to this too, maybe, but our data, and maybe it's because we were in 5 days a week. I mean, we are a little concerned about those kids who were remote, but our data showed that our kids, didn't lose as much as, we thought they might lose. But the bottom line is they have lost some, and we do have to target some of those kids that need that extra help this summer. So, Katie, do you want to just give a quick update on where we are with summer programming?
Yep. Patty Pomelo, Jenny Duranzo, Angie, and myself have been meeting almost every week to plan the summer program. We had our first wave of letters go out to parents, and we're now in the process of making sure we have it all aligned with contacting parents on students who are on IEPs. So this could also count as extended school year. We anticipate between 80 to 100 students. We got a slow first response, and now it seems to be warming up a bit. And that's for our morning academic program. We're also just being aware and cautious of staffing levels too, so that we can match and keep our low numbers. The idea was that 10 students with 2 teachers, and keeping with that. So that's moving along. Lots of letters coming out. If you hear of anybody, say, we're in process. It was a pretty big task to undertake right now. The afternoon programming, we now have 3 options, and they're all limited capacity. That's something that I explained that we want to be really clear about. The rec departments will have their cap of of student numbers that they can have both at the Heartland Rec or the Windsor, just because of numbers, and they're still waiting their COVID restrictions of what they can do for summer programming. HCRS will be offering services for students in the afternoon as well, small groups for clients of theirs. So that will be another option for students. And the BTG program, which is the after-school program at Windsor, is also looking to have an afternoon program that our students could participate in, and that's in the works. So we're planning on partnering with all three of those to give students the options that they might want or not want. So that's where we are. Hopefully by the end of next week, we will have everything solidified. HCRS is a go, the rec department's a go. It's some of the nuances that we're still working out. So I think that that's the latest and greatest that we have.
Nancy Frederick.
Busing I know there's busing in the morning. Is there busing in the afternoon for all three programs?
The busing will go in the morning, and then after the academic program, parents will need to pick up their children for whatever programs they decide they're doing in the afternoon. So because they'll all have different end times. So the rec department, BTG, and HCRS parents will need to pick up. And I think the earliest end time is 3, and then there may be later end times depending on what program students are in. But we will, if the child's not going to do anything for the afternoon, they're going to go home, we provide busing back at 11:30 to be back at their home school by 12. So parents can pick up midday.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anne Marie.
So the busing is just from the home school to Windsor? It's not, you won't be picking up kids at their homes or on the bus routes?
We are the logistics, because of so few students and so big of an area to cover. We decided that having students get to their home schools was about logistically what we could do, given the and Dr. Baker, you're the one who talked to the bus company, but just for the sheer volume of buses, bus cost and everything else, it didn't make sense to be able to do that.
How does this compare to the previous year's Wethersfield summer program? Like, is this covering all the same types of students, or are some kids not being covered now?
The first cutoff was the bottom 30% of students scoring on the TMP, and that was similar to, if not exceeded, school programs that were kids who were identified before. And we're going to make a next pass on this April's TMP scores and open it up to as many as we can. So I would say yes, we've met or exceeded the students that we've identified before.
Any other questions?
Katie, do you have an estimate of the total number of students we'll serve? Or maybe you said that and I missed it.
Right now we're looking at, I think my last numbers were about 65. We're still getting the rolling of students identified through through their special ed programs. So conservatively 80. And we had thought we could handle upwards of 100. I'm not sure due to staffing if we can get that high. We're working on putting those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. It takes a lot of spreadsheets. So conservatively 80, if we can serve up to 100, we'll open it up that far.
Yeah. And keep in mind the summer programming also includes the food program, right? There'll be the summer food program, which again, because of the need to identify a centralized location that allows us to serve, all kids, that'll be based also in the bigger kitchen at Windsor, and it'll cut down on transportation. I know that last year, I think they used to have to go and get the lunches from Heartland and Wethersfield, but all those kids will eat before they go back to their afternoon programs or home.
So David, I have a question on that. So kids who are not participating in the summer school, but are participating in the individual town rec programs,
Mhm,
let's say Heartland kids, for instance,
mhm.
the lunches will not be coming out to them?
No, we'll still service because we're going to be in that summer meals program mode again. We'll still, even if a student doesn't come to the summer program, they can still have access to the summer meals, and there'll be a system for some of that delivery that Craig and Heather are working on, and Rodney. So no, everybody that qualifies should be, again, it'll be centrally, we can't do the door-to-door service,
Right, yeah.
but there will be central locations in all 3 towns where lunches can be picked up.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that clarification. Does anyone else have questions on the summer program? I think it's amazing what is being planned. It's really exciting. So thank you, Katie, and Angie, and who else? Several other people.
Patty and Jenny. Patty
and
Baumel, Jenny Duranzo.
Yeah, so thank you for all that work.
It's fun. We're looking forward to having fun this summer with everyone. Thank you.
And well, thank you for putting together a program that isn't I have to go to summer school. It sounds more like, yay, I get to go to summer school. So I think that's how it should be. It's because learning is fun. And include all the libraries.
Will do.
Next up, we are into the policy section. And it says second reading, but I believe, at least for the anti-racism policy, that we're considering this our first reading.
Yeah, I think we were going to do those for maybe all 3. Consider it first reading. Yeah.
Okay. So let's begin with the anti-racism policy.
And I think before we start the general discussion, I know that we certainly have published that publicly now. People have gotten a chance to see it. I wonder if, given the expertise, as Colleen said, and Elizabeth alluded to, the workshop work and the work that we're doing with Dr. Crum, whether or not we want to have a general discussion about do we just stay on course? Do we slow this down a little bit? What do people think about that?
This is Amy. I do not believe that slowing down is in our best interest. I do not believe it's in our community's interest. I think we have had this conversation long enough that now we need action if we are going to have the community that we want and what this anti-racism policy will allow us to do. I think slowing down would be saying, okay, we're too afraid. I think we need to acknowledge and just be strong as we move forward. Colleen Spence.
I agree with you. My expectation is that we'll want to make some changes to some of the wording in the policy based on the conversations that we're going to have going forward with Dr. Crum. But that what she's going to do is help us get it right. So I don't think there are going to be word changes that
Huge, right?
that slow things down. I think they'll be the right word changes. So I think we can move forward with the expectation that we have a final reading when we get past all of the work that we do. What's it, 3 more weeks?
Thank you, Colleen. Rebecca?
David, I'm not sure if everyone has had a chance to read it. I know that the board has had a chance to read it. I don't believe, I don't know if the public may have had an opportunity to read it.
Yeah, I know that I sent it out with my weekend update, so I know that all of the parents have gotten a chance who wanted to look at it. And I think, I don't know, but I think also, I think it's on the website, but maybe we haven't made that clear enough or announced that clearly enough that that's where it is. And I could ask it, we could figure out other ways to get it, more globally published.
I just wanted to say something first and then Elizabeth. I think it's good for our community to see it, but we also have to remember that it is the Supervisory Union Board that will be approving it. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Amy. I think that just kind of weighing in on the potential of changing the time frame of implementing it. I think that the whole point of having the however many months long discussion that we had preceding Friday was to make sure that we had the policy that we were comfortable with bringing to the board, which we did, and to make sure that and the hiring of Melissa was to have her help us implement the policy that we gave her, not have her critique the policy or so I'm a little bit confused about why we would go back and rehammer the policy. I mean, outside of of course we would have a discussion about it on the SU board and it's obviously not set in stone, but for the SU board, but I feel like, David, you're advocating for people outside of the SU board to weigh in on it when that's really not, that was not my understanding at all.
Yeah, no, and maybe I'm not being clear in what I'm saying. I mean, the public certainly can attend meetings and weigh in on any item that's on the agenda. So I don't think that's what you're talking about. But I wasn't trying to say that, we need a whole lot more input on this. I was just saying that given I was sort of reiterating what Colleen Spence had said earlier, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Colleen, that we are unpacking this policy to a point where I think we're understanding some of the words in the policy better than we might have before we started that process. And maybe that's all that needs to, I mean, I've read the policy 2 times again today. I mean, based on what Dr. Crum did with us on Friday, I'm not advocating in any way, shape, or form that anything changed dramatically. I mean, the Supervisory Union Board will make the decision about adopting this policy. I just want to make sure that, the definitions that we've had, may at some point, may need to be revisited at some point, but I'm not suggesting that right away.
I'm going to say just a little bit here, Colleen Spence, and then to Elizabeth's point, I interpreted the conversation that we had with Melissa on Friday that she wants to help us in communicating this policy. So she wants to make sure that we understand and have a community use or understanding of the use of the language that is in the policy, so that we're all talking as one, as opposed to saying, well, I thought this is what this meant, And it, just so that we're all in agreement of how we're going to move forward.
Yeah.
Now, Colleen.
I think I pretty much agree with you, although the conversation that we had around safe and brave makes me wonder if we want to revisit the way we've used the word safe in the document some. So we could, I don't know where it fits to talk about that, if you want to, I don't know, discuss it offline or dive in now, or, and I don't, in general, I think that the wording is I agree that she is helping us understand the document as it is. Am I the only one that took it that way?
Well, the conversation that we had on a safe space versus a brave space was probably the most, I wouldn't say murky, but it was probably the most challenging part of our conversation, because brave means, at least in our conversation, is that yes, it is going to be painful for some people to hear, but it's still going to be a supportive, supporting people through that pain. I could be wrong in that interpretation. It's been a couple of days since we had the conversation. So I am going to turn my mic off and hand it over to Mark and then Chris.
I guess I just have one suggestion, and as far as the anti-racism task force goes, did anybody else have any issues with wording with the policy other than that one line referring to safe versus brave? And if there are no other objections, I say we keep moving forward on whatever it is we have to do, and then simply tweak that one line if we all feel it's necessary. I don't see the wording of that one line being enough to stop us. My understanding was that she was going to help us roll this out and question. I mean, I didn't feel that she was questioning the wording. I really felt that she just wanted us to make sure we were all on the same page. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. And brave spaces is one of the definitions. So it was
in the definitions. Yeah.
Yeah, brave spaces. Chris. If you can unmute yourself.
As someone who wasn't at that meeting, and given the structure of first reading, this is the time to discuss this, I think. And it doesn't stop anything. And this is the perfect time to say, oh, we need to change this word or that word. That's what a first reading's about. That's part of the process. We look at it, we say, okay, I want to change these editorial things, and then there's a second reading, and then we vote and we approve it. But so this is, I don't think we're slowing down if we're having this discussion of reading of those words, and if that's the only words that are coming up, that's the purpose of the first reading in my mind. And I would like to know what those I need to hear more discussion of it because I wasn't in that conversation.
I'll just say that I think maybe it struck me strongly in the workshop that we can't guarantee that someone won't be hurt in a conversation that arises around racism in the classroom. That if there's someone who is touched deeply by the conversation, or someone that says something that's hurtful, then we, as much as we can, have control over it. We don't have 100% control over it. And I like acknowledging that. I mean, I don't know. I think it's a word worth considering not being mushy about. You can't promise that someone's not going to be hurt in conversations that we take on about racism.
Exactly. And that's where the brave space comes.
Yes.
That we need to acknowledge that there probably will be hurt, and then to acknowledge that hurt and not discount it in any way, because all of our experiences are different, are how we not interpret, but how we the lens through which we live our lives is different based on our experiences. And if I am hurt by something and someone says, they didn't mean anything, that hurts me more. So in a brave space, we acknowledge and say, can you talk more about your hurt so that I can be a better person to support you and to not hurt you further?
I think, if I may, I think part of it was also sort of mirroring life. In life, we can create safe spaces for ourselves, but we're not always going to be safe. And part of the role of education is to give us tools to be able to cope with those times when we need the tools to cope with them. And this was sort of the same, this sort of a microcosm, a thematic microcosm in a way, or that was what I took away from it.
Right, thank you. Rebecca.
I happen to find the language provocative, but one of the things that we talked about was trying to provide our educators through staff development with those tools and the direction on how to handle these sort of situations when they arise in the classroom. One of the things that Dr. Crum talked about was that brave spaces, spaces where people engage in storytelling. But she also talked about tips for productive discussion. She talked about creating, to give grace, as Amy mentioned and others mentioned. There will be times when people may say the wrong thing or understand the wrong thing. And how do you create an environment where you turn that into a lesson, an educational lesson, to speak from one's own experience with honesty, to use the I word. And I think that these are things that ground rules that educators can lay out to help children create those sort of places to have these discussions, but also seeing that there are boundaries. So part of me, I feel that the description of brave spaces in the second page is the perfect description. It's a non-physical space within a school designed to help create an environment that allows individuals to engage with one another over controversial issues like race, diversity, and social justice with honesty, sensitivity, and respect. The intention is to help reassure those who feel anxious about sharing their thoughts and feelings regarding these sensitive and controversial issues. And we're going to have children who are going to come in and not disagree. And that should be all right. As an educator, the whole goal is to help these children, one, be able to speak about issues that can be uncomfortable, but also do that in a place where they can be comfortable. I think it's going to take a while for that to happen, but hopefully the school will provide ongoing staff professional development so that it's not a one shot, and I'm sure that David and Angie has already spoke to that and said they're looking at ongoing professional development, so annual, so that staff are being reminded and also assisted with the language and keeping the language alive in the school.
Thank you, Rebecca. Chris, did you have more? Did you have another question? I see Sandy Soho from the community. You have your hand raised, Sandy?
Yeah, so I can suggest something in the, I'm sorry, I haven't gone to these meetings before. And I agree with everything that everybody said. This is really hard work, and it's not something that's a one and done, and we have to show grace to the teachers as well, because this is something that is very hard to learn initially. And I liked the idea of the exercise where at first it's hard, but as you go forward, you'll be able to do it a little bit easier. But I appreciate the fact that Windsor is doing this. The third statement, oh no, it's not the third one. The fourth one, I would suggest changing the last part of it. It has the impacts of white supremacy, white superiority, and all forms of racism. And I think you could put white supremacy / white superiority and add in white privilege. That's all.
Thank you. That is a consideration. So that was on the 4th.
Number 4 under purpose is what Sandy was referring to.
Right.
Section 4, number 2. Section 4, policy statement.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
It's under one. Well, it's
one
under,
purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
If you look
Number
at,
4 under 1.
Right, under 1. That's where I saw it. And yeah, you could either do the / white supremacy / or you could change. Yeah, you could even change. I don't know. I guess white superiority and white privilege are two different things, really. But yeah.
Yeah. So on part 4, policy statement number 2 has opposed teachings that perpetuate white supremacy, superiority, instead of and / or privilege, we could say and privilege.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because under the definitions, white supremacy or superiority are put together as one definition.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
So maybe we could, I hadn't, sorry, you know, when things are really brought to your attention. perhaps we could go with white supremacy / superiority and privilege.
And then put that separately is what Sandy was saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think whatever we do, we ought to be consistent. So where we say that in the purpose, it ought to read similarly in the definitions and then similarly again in the policy statement.
Correct.
Yeah.
Rebecca, did you have more? Thank you, Sandy, for bringing that to our attention.
I don't know how to put my hand down.
Yeah, that's it. Just hit that hand again and it'll go down. I'm going to make a copy just so I can make note of the changes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Were there any other comments? There have been hours upon hours upon hours upon hours put into this policy and the conversation, and many, many, many hours of meetings. So I want to thank everyone who's been a part of this, and also, well, to all of our administrators and the many school board members who are part of our supervisory union and are dedicated to creating this anti-racism policy so that we have a community that stands for anti-racism. And with that, if there are no further questions or comments, we will move on to our second policy for the evening, which is English learners. And we did the first reading for this policy at our March meeting.
Yes, we did. The more I think about that, we did. And this, by the way, came right from the recommended policies from the VSBA.
Yes. So are there any other, does anyone have more comments or questions on the English learners policy? Bill Yates. Bill, we lost you.
Am I back?
Yes.
You are.
Now you're gone again. No, now you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so just quickly, I wanted to point out that the contents of this policy allow the district to follow the legal guidelines. So I didn't find anything in the policy that really needed to be changed.
Yeah. I would agree with that, Bill.
Were there any other comments? Since this is the second reading and there are no changes, we can move this down to items for action when we get there, and we can approve this policy. Next is the equity policy. Any comments or questions on the equity policy? Elizabeth, you have your hand raised.
I do. I have a few comments on this policy, actually. Okay, you ready?
Ready.
In that, wait a minute, let me pull it up. Where are you? Where are you? Okay, I believe it's the second bullet point under implementation, which is provide every student with equitable access to high quality and culturally relevant instruction, curriculum, support facilities, technology, and other educational resources that represent their individual identities, cultures, backgrounds, and experiences. I think that this is quite, related to my other comment, which is regarding the bullet point number 4, incorporate the voice, culture, and perspectives of students, staff, families, and communities, and so on. And here's my problem. My problem is that it forgets, it's making accommodation for it's making accommodation for the variety of cultures that exists within the demographic that is in a classroom or at a school, but it lets out the fact that our students are going out into the rest of the world where there are lots of other cultures and influences that interact with each other and have history and add interest and creativity and combine purposes with our students. And so my problem is that this seems to reflect whoever's in the class. And I think that part of the reason that the Ethnic Studies program, Act 1, is so phenomenal is that it brings everybody an understanding of the other cultures that exist in our country, in our society, and in doing so gives them inherent value. It doesn't just see them as a sort of accommodation. It sees them as being part of what's inherently good about our country. And now I'll step off my soapbox. Apologize. But I think that it should.
Yeah. Did you have an as specific edit, Elizabeth? That would.
So it says incorporate the voice, cultures, and perspectives of students, families, and communities that reflect the student demographics. And I have a problem with that. I don't think it should reflect the student demographics. I think it should reflect, a much broader swath. I mean, that's the point.
I hear what you're saying. Yep.
So perhaps that it reflects society or world demographic. I don't know. Maybe even leave out the word demographics.
What about that reflect the reality of the world?
Yeah. But I think that not only encompasses now, but that won't need to change 5 years from now, because the world, we have to change with the world. We have to be flexible and not just look at a classroom demographic. Particularly, let's say we have a small classroom,
right?
10 or 15 kids.
But also likewise in the bullet that says provide every student with equitable access to high quality and culturally relevant. I mean, again, the whole purpose is to broaden what our tiny white community's definition of culturally relevant is.
Right. So to high quality and culturally diverse instruction curriculum that respect their individual identities as well as those of the world.
Yeah. I see some funny faces being made on the rest of the the screen though. So please give some more input.
Okay, Rebecca has her hand up.
And just to be clear, while we talk about this, we're on the fourth bullet, right, underneath.
So this was the second bullet and the fourth bullet.
Okay, I want to follow along in
The
case.
fourth bullet is the one that starts incorporate the voice, cultures, and perspectives.
Right. Yep.
And the second bullet was provide every student with equitable access.
Right, got it. So if we're going to make changes, just let me know, because if they're minor, I mean, it doesn't prevent you from passing this tonight. If it's a major revamp, then we have to. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, Rebecca. Go ahead.
Oh, that's all right, David. I just wanted to comment on what Elizabeth commented on earlier regarding, and also Amy, giving our students this worldly understanding. And I think that if we don't do that, we fail our students, because they're going to go into a very competitive international work environment. And if they're not sensitive, aware, understanding of others other than themselves, they are really going to fall behind quickly. So that is really important to incorporate as we move forward in our curriculum.
Thank you. Chris, and then Scott.
So I hate that I'm a writer, I'm an English major, I'm an English teacher. I'm wanting to know, I wasn't here for the first, this is the first reading or the second reading? I'm not.
I think it's a second reading of this one too.
This is the second reading, okay, because so I wasn't at the last SU meeting, I don't believe. But I guess I'm not clear. Well, I have two questions. First question is, where did this policy come from? Is this something that was suggested by the VSBA or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it's actually,
I guess
it's one of their required ones.
Okay. So I would agree with everything that Elizabeth and Rebecca said about what our goals as a school system should be when it comes to making sure that our students have all of these opportunities to experience things beyond their own cultures and all of that. But I guess my sense of the policy, just in reading it tonight and reading it actually earlier tonight before the meeting even, was that it was here to safeguard things, that we weren't leaving people out or deciding that things were less important if there were only a few people that had that cultural experience, rather than being a policy about giving our students a broad cultural experience. And I'm not against either one, but I think I'm not sure that what Elizabeth is suggesting meets the requirements of the policy. Rather, it expands the policy into something else. And that maybe then if it does, then we need to alter the whole, the purpose of the policy, I guess. And that's my sense of it. It seems like we're now broadening definitions for the purposes of making overall better education decisions. I agree with everything that Elizabeth's saying, but I'm just not sure whether this is the place to do this. That would be my question.
Yeah, so I think that making this policy stronger in the way that Elizabeth and Rebecca suggested, and just making those two changes, and then combine this policy with the very strong anti-racism policy, and we have some very strong policy going forward that will be reflected in all of the actions in classrooms, in curriculum, in just how our schools are run. And does that answer a little bit, Chris?
I would say a little bit, but I guess I'm not sure that I think it's challenging to, when you start trying to suggest that you need to reflect society or something like that, you start getting into very fuzzy areas that that it ends up, to certain people, certainly, and not necessarily to me, but to certain people, it's going to start looking like you're defining what's the good stuff. And that would be where I would find that it may be difficult.
I understand. But don't you think don't you think the policy does that anyway?
Does it? I mean, it's about speaking to making sure that everybody has everything that it's an equity question. So it's bringing everybody up to the same level and having everybody feeling like they have their place.
But then why specify the demographics then?
Can I chirp in here on this very same topic?
Well, actually, Scott has his hand.
Sorry.
Scott, would you mind if Bill jumped in, or would you like to speak first?
No, Bill can go ahead. Bill can go ahead if he's got something.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. I think I agree with Chris on the point of what is the purpose of this section. The purpose of this section, I believe what the purpose of the section is to make sure that that the perspective of an individual in the class with a differing ethnic background is not ignored. It's not to say all the cultures must be followed, because this is an equity piece. Now, I also agree with Elizabeth that, this section is very poorly written, and because it's so poorly written, it implies that all the demographics must be covered within the classroom. Basically, the purpose of it is to make sure that somebody's ethnic background is not, or demographic background is not ignored because it's in the minority.
Or it could be, as I think it was Jameson who said, I mean, what we don't want is for whoever, in whatever form their identity takes, whether it's, people who wear glasses or people who like the color blue or any piece of the many, many facets of our identity, that we don't have to have one person represent an entire group of people unless they want to. And I think that's part of it, but it's really poorly.
Right, but I think the important part is that this policy is not in place to dictate the curriculum.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think if you begin to look at talking about, well, we should be looking at backgrounds, all backgrounds, but this policy isn't really dictating that we shouldn't be looking at all backgrounds. It is an equity policy to make sure that somebody is not
Left out.
left out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not dictating
And
what?
that's where I counter, actually. I counter because by including everybody in the classroom, you're still limiting the scope of
But it's not to make sure you include everyone in the classroom.
But that's different. But that's different.
No one is excluded. I mean, that seems like a fine point, but it's the point.
Yeah, the purpose of the policy is to make sure no one's excluded. It's not to make sure that everything is included.
Is included, yeah.
But I'm not saying that having everything included is not a great idea, but it changes the function of the policy in my mind. If you now look at it and go, oh, wait a minute, you didn't include this and this and this. What you're including is everybody that's involved. That's everybody that's in the room. And
say that I still object to that because I'm talking about the kids at Albert Bridge where there's, it's sometimes 6 kids in the class, and that would be it might be a pretty limited scope of what there is by.
But the policy's not setting curriculum. The policy's not suggesting that you should limit what's available to the students, that you should limit it to just the demographics of the students that are in the room. It only says that you shouldn't ignore the demographics of the people that are in the room.
Right. It's not.
It doesn't say anything about defining what demographics means per se. Like, does that mean?
Well, the policy speaks to the concept of the individuals should not be left out. That's the. And I'm not against changing the where is it?
I haven't changed anything.
There was
yet.
a good state. There was a I mean, this is one of those great statements that is way too long just by the purpose of including all of these things, but it's that concept of it's committed to the success of every student regardless of. I mean, that's to make sure things aren't excluded. And
it's almost like you don't need that statement. I mean, not that statement, but I mean, it's almost like Elizabeth, when you're talking, I mean, I don't know why that bullet, I'm talking about the 4th bullet, not the 2nd bullet. I don't know why that 4th bullet couldn't just simply say, incorporate the voice, culture, and perspectives of students, staff, families, and communities, and support and enhance student success. In other words, leave out that reflects student demographics, because it's almost not needed. It makes it too wordy. Because what you're trying to do in an equity policy is make sure you don't leave somebody's voice out of the conversation. You don't leave somebody's cultural perspective out of the conversation. I don't know what that means that reflects student demographics. Is that free and reduced? Is that poor, rich? Is that, I almost think that's a statement you don't need, personally.
yeah, I would agree with that.
I agree with that too, David.
Because if you incorporate the voice, culture, and perspectives of the students, staff, families, and communities,
you've done it.
Yeah,
you've done it. I'm striking that right now.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Scott.
I feel that would be broader.
Hey, thank you. So I am going to look at the policy myself. I'm switching tabs here. So 3 things, and I'll start with my little points, and then I'll join in the conversation that we've been having. Number 1, I'm so happy, and I just wanted to say that out loud here, that we have the minutes that we have and that they're so succinct, and that I was referring to them, and you can clearly see that it was second reading on these 2 policies. And that was just really nice that the minutes provide that so clearly. Number 2, at the bottom of the equity policy last time, there's a statement at the bottom, 1 sentence. We talked about that a little bit. There was a suggestion. And I think now, thinking about that for a month, that the 2 things come up. This is the kind of discussion I don't know, but I would suspect would be part of an administrative team meeting most any week. And I'm not sure how often those happen, but they happen almost all the time, I think. And so maybe the word biannual is not rigorous enough, and maybe it's not that hard to have this more regular than that. For instance, the financial stuff that Ed provides us is more often than biannual. I don't know what the perfect period would be, but my suggestion is maybe biannual is not often enough or rigorous enough. Thirdly, now this conversation that we've had in the last couple of minutes, if we go up to the top of that, the bottom of the second page, implementation, and the statement is to realize this commitment to equity, comma, the district will, colon. And so when I saw Elizabeth's, when I heard Elizabeth's suggestion on bullet 4 below that, I think we've talked ourselves out of that perhaps at this point, but it sounded like maybe Elizabeth and board, that the board could put itself in a tight spot where its staff needed to reflect the world. And of course, we want our staff to reflect the world. We don't always get candidates from that reflect the world. We try hard to. So, we don't want a bullet in this equity statement that could perhaps get us in trouble because we don't have staff that reflect the world. That's maybe a little stretch on the way it reads, but the word staff is there. And so I don't know if I'm happy with the latest suggestion either, because it seems, well, I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Yep. I'm sorry, Amy. Was there still a problem with bullet 2, or did we take care of it by cleaning up bullet 4?
What was the issue with bullet 2?
You
I
had
lost
mentioned,
track.
Elizabeth had mentioned that one too. Provide every student with equitable access to high quality and culturally relevant instruction, blah, 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 and other educational resources that respect, I think it was their individual identities, cultures, backgrounds, abilities, and experiences.
No, it was culturally relevant.
Okay.
And your question about culturally relevant was?
Who decides
Yeah, who decides what's relevant?
what? I mean, can I comment on Scott's
comment?
Sure.
Certainly.
Scott, I think you raise a really good point about the bottom of the second page. And I think that the anti-racism policy requires that we also come back, and I haven't memorized the policy, So I don't know how,
Shame on you.
how often we're supposed to be, but I think those two things should definitely be connected because it requires that, that policy requires that we also come back and check every so often to make sure that we're meeting whatever goals we set forth for ourselves. So good eye, I think. But we should, before we approve this policy, we should make sure that those are connected to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I just went back and looked at the anti-racism policy, and it doesn't mean we can't, but right now it doesn't have a annual biannual reporting mechanism. But we.
Are you sure?
I'm looking.
It does not. I don't see anything, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably implied, but not stated explicitly. But we could clearly, if we do that with equity, because I see the two, and I agree with Scott, the administrative team is going to be looking at benchmarks and indicators and data to see how we're doing as we work through this work. And I think the equity and the anti-racism will integrate. So I think whatever we say in equity, we could say, you know, we could say in this one. I agree with that.
And I think if we're going to have I can't remember the name of the, because I'm tired. The name of the staff, the title of the staff that we're talking about hiring. So equity coordinator.
Right.
Social equity coordinator. I mean, we could easily have them as part of their thing come, as Scott said, every quarter and report to us on how that's going. I mean, the hope being that they work themselves out of a job anyway, right?
I agree. Yep.
Right. And until we have that person, then it will be our administrators who report to us on a quarterly basis.
Well, as the policy reads now, it's the superintendent. Do you want to leave that language as is for the equity policy?
Yeah, and I'm going to put that in the anti-racism policy too. So,
Wendy, yes, I think so.
Just
because
yeah.
the superintendent is responsible for all of this anyway. And
Right.
superintendent has the power of delegation. So even now, although he would be responsible to identify outcome indicators, I don't believe he'll be doing that in a vacuum. And he could very well ask one or all of the administrators to create a report for us.
Yeah.
You know what it is? I just realized what it is. It's not the policy. It is the other document, the implementation document for the anti-racism policy.
Yeah, it might be in there. Yeah.
Okay.
It really sets that out. And of course, we wouldn't read that as a policy because it's not a policy, but it's an implementation document.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't think it's been circulated to our SU board, but it really should be because it's a big commitment.
Yeah.
But
we just didn't want, I don't think we wanted to mix that up with the discussion of policy, but I agree with you. We need to look at that without a doubt. I'm looking at bullet 2 again. I'm just trying to make
we should
sure.
at least let everybody see it.
See what?
The implementation steps.
It's the procedures.
Okay.
Procedures, thank you.
Yeah, so we can do that for our next meeting.
Oh, we
And
could
to
do
bring
that.
it into the mix right
Yeah.
now is not a good idea.
No, I agree. I
No,
agree.
No, but we can.
But
Yeah.
just to clarify, those did come out. They were sent out with the rest of the packet, and there is no timing on that. But I did make a note at the bottom of it for the notes, for the minutes, for David.
Yeah. So that was the procedures, you mean?
Yes, the procedures document. And just to back up to your other bullet point on number 2, what if you added the word worldly culturally relevant?
so that
Well,
you're specifying a wider range?
Yeah, I think the issue was more around relevant. Who determines what's relevant? What I was going to suggest is that we say, provide every student with equitable access to high quality and culturally diverse instruction, curriculum support, and facility. You know what I mean? Rather than somebody's determining, yeah, I think culturally diverse does it, because that's what we want, right? We don't want one perspective. We want diverse perspectives brought to all of our instruction, essentially, so that people feel comfortable to have it. Does that make sense or no? I'm not trying to simplify this, but
I think it does. Chris has his hand raised and has been going wild with his actual hand.
Yes. Well, two things. One, I think that makes sense, because the truth is that bullet 4 answers the question of looking at the specific cultural perspectives and all of that, the voice and the culture, so that the bringing up culturally relevant isn't necessary, I would think.
I agree.
My other question was just a clarification, that Amy, you said quarterly, and the policy currently says biannually. So I want to make sure, I'm all for quarterly, but we hadn't stated that. I don't think. I wasn't sure. Are we changing it to quarterly is what I'm asking.
Only if we all agree upon that.
Sure.
And to Elizabeth's point and whoever else, I can't remember at this point, so that it coordinates with our anti-racism procedural implementation, etc.
So do we want quarterly?
I think quarterly is a good idea, and then we can always change the procedurals to match that.
Yeah, that's easy.
When we get to it.
That's
Well,
easy.
why don't we just pin them together, and that way, why don't we pin this policy to the procedure, so that if the procedure changes, we don't have to have a whole change of policy. We could just change it.
No, you just, yeah.
Okay. I agree 100%. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sounds good.
Rebecca, you had your hand raised?
I like the idea of quarterly also, because at the beginning, this is language that we want to have on a regular basis, because it really is on some degree new language for many of us. So this will just be a reminder.
Okay, thank you. I think given some of these changes in this equity policy, that we will put it off one more month, so we can all see the final product.
Yep. We'll get that out to you. Yep.
Okay, thank you. In light of the time, we're moving on. I have so many pieces of paper here. COVID updates, if we could get something really quick, please.
Yeah, actually, that can be very quick, because we did cover some of that a little bit earlier, but we are, and actually these next two items kind of go together. We're looking right now at end of year activities in light of the most relevant, or not relevant, but recent, guidelines around COVID, looking at the governor's Vermont Forward initiative. And we have not changed a lot right now, even though we know there are some things that we could do. We could go from 6 feet to 3 feet, and but we have done away with health checks in the morning just because the travel restrictions are no longer that critical. We've asked people to just be diligent and take care of those health checks themselves at home. We're hoping certainly that that happens. And we are right now, I don't think we're ready to report out now, but we are right now, we'll probably spend more time in detail at the individual board meetings talking about end of year activities and what those will look like in the COVID. That's things like graduation, school dances, proms, end of year dinners, that sort of stuff. We're very close, but I wouldn't want to say much tonight until we we'll bring that to each individual board. I think
Great.
that combined end of year activities. too.
Okay. Sweet, thank you. Did anyone have any comments or questions on that? In light of time. Okay, items for action. We do have an item for action. I will take a motion to adopt the English learners policy.
So moved.
Second.
Nikki will second.
Good. Chris moved, and either Nikki or Nancy will give it. Maybe we'll give it to Nikki, huh?
Give it to Nikki.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the English learners policy, say aye.
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 I think you almost all said it at the same time. It was like, whew. Where did that go? Is there anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Thank you. We have English learners policy approved. Were there any other items for action, David?
I think that's it.
Okay, setting the next agenda. We have anti-racism task force and anti-racism policy.
Correct.
We have more COVID update,
Equity policy also.
equity policy.
Amy,
Yes,
I would like to present to the board our recovery plan draft at that time. I will be, I'm working on the initial needs assessment, and I'm going to be sharing that with the staff and the board probably tomorrow, just so you can see what our data, it's very interesting what our data is showing us, but it's not really ready for tonight, and it wasn't on the agenda. So so I'll be sharing that. I want to also go over the recovery plan with you, and the purpose of sharing the needs assessment is to get your feedback if there's anything that we're missing.
okay, great. Elizabeth,
Amy, our next meeting is going to have to be our reorganizational meeting.
Correct.
oh my goodness, yes,
Correct.
that is true, because Heartland.
Heartland has a big day tomorrow.
No, Saturday.
No, sorry.
No,
Yeah.
Tuesday. Wait,
What?
Right.
next Tuesday.
Next
We
Tuesday.
presented on Saturday.
Tuesday. Okay.
We did present on Saturday. That's correct.
Okay,
Glad you're
so
on top of it, Nikki.
Nikki's all over it.
I was on top of it Saturday. I am not now.
so between reorganization and what we currently have, that is going to be a full meeting.
Oh, I was wondering if we could just briefly, just very generally talk about the possibility of the board setting goals for itself next year as part of our reorganizational discussion.
It would be good to do that before summer hits, like if not next meeting, June for sure, because that would also dovetail with my goals, which I know we still have to talk about that, but yeah.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about what the goals are at the next
Oh,
meeting.
okay. I see.
I was just thinking we could start with the broad conversation about
How we're gonna do that. Yeah.
Then with reorganization and talking about broad goals and all
No,
of
we're
the
talking
policies.
about goals, not
I'm not talking about broad goals, broadly talking about.
broad goals. We're broadly talking about.
Well, even broadly talking about goals. That is going to be a very full
I mean,
meeting.
it's already taken up a lot of time now.
I like that.
Exactly.
Broadly speaking.
So I would say that is it for our
That's
next
gonna
agenda.
be a big agenda. That's a
Yes, it is.
good agenda. I also have some bad news for the Mount Scottney board members. I just need you to stay on for a couple of minutes after I mean, with no decisions, it's not a meeting, it's not warned, but I just have a couple of, one update that's critical.
Okay.
Are we having an executive session?
I don't think we need, we don't need an executive session.
The one thing I was questioning is that we often do a retreat, an SU board retreat in June, and that seems like a good time to less broadly talk about our goals. And I don't know how we want to tackle that retreat.
Well, that's good. I think that's what
Throwing it
Elizabeth
out
is saying, that we talk about how we're going to talk about them. So that's good. I like it.
Yeah, that could actually be more of the conversation to find a date to have our retreat.
Right. This group needs a retreat.
Indeed.
Maybe like a 3-day overnight or something.
With a lot of chocolate.
I'm kidding, Colleen.
It doesn't sound relaxing to me.
I know, I hear you.
We'll have a virtual retreat and we can all use our own backgrounds. Like we just put, everybody have palm trees.
Okay, so are we agreeing that there's no need for executive session?
No, we don't.
Okay,
So we can just have a motion to adjourn at this point.
yep, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move. Nikki.
Nikki?
Amy, before you adjourn, I'd just like to always say publicly on the meeting, the next one I'm assuming is May 24th at 6:30, yes?
Correct.
Correct. If that is the fourth Monday of May.
It is.
Yay, thank you.
All the Scutney folks do not sign off. Stay with me here.
All those in favor of adjourning this meeting,
Aye.
say aye and wave bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Aye.
David, stop the recording.
I'm going to thank you, Nancy. I'm going to stop recording.